Hello, everyone. Welcome to the 199th episode of the Spiritual Brainstorm. I've entitled this video Downloads just because it's been, a few days that I've just been receiving so much, information, insights on so many different topics. And it's just like, my wife has this expression sometimes when I share my sort of intuitions and things that I sort of channel. I don't know how else to put it. But she says that sometimes it's almost like I'm vomiting inside her own brain. Just because just all pours out of me. And I have difficulty in structuring it and giving it a form. The reason I'm recording this video is that it wants to come out in one way or another. So I don't even know what I'm actually going to talk about. But there are many things, but let's just see where this takes us. So let me just get in a more comfortable seated position here. So I can get into the meat of the contents. So first thing I wanted to discuss, because this was a video that I saw with Bernardo Kastrup debating another philosopher, talking about entropy, for instance, entropy. And what is entropy? And the fact that, it's so magical that, normally everything should be dispersed across the universe, that matter should be equally dispersed and everything equally dispersed. But then you have gravity and other things that kind of throws a wrench into that, and then you have certain agglomerations of matter in one place and not another place. And of course, that's the standard Big Bang cause and effect tale of where entropy comes from. But if you've watched my videos, you would understand that for me, life comes first. It's the first thing to appear in the universe, not the Big Bang. The Big Bang is just one form or one aspect that entropy takes after billions of years of life's own evolution, and then looking backwards onto the evolution of the rules that it sets for itself. Then you can obviously infer into the past what that would look like. It is almost like if you are an avatar in a video game and you evolve the rules of the video game based on the rules that you impose upon yourself, basically, then if you look at the outer reality and you apply a linear cause and effect logic to the reality that you're observing at that instant, which is just a projection of the internal rules that you set for yourself, then you can have the illusion that the past of that interface is whatever it is based on the rules that you set for yourself. So, say you create a virtual particle that is not really existing, but that is just a virtual representation of rules that you've set for yourself in a simulation or a kind of game. From the state of that particle, you can apply cause and effect logic and then just reverse time and trace that particle back to an origin point, which doesn't tell you anything about reality or what the real past was, but just what the logical consequences or into the past of the rules that you set for yourself in the present are. And what that matter looks like and what the past of that matter looks like based on the set of rules that you set for yourself. So, in order to understand this, let's give you a concrete example. So let's imagine that a hydrogen atom initially is alive. Alive as in it has a boundary that it is aware of, and then it has a number of potential alternate inner states of being. Okay, I'm not going to write that out, but what I mean is that imagine this hydrogen atom originally is in a sort of a quantum superposition of all of its potential states simultaneously in one place. Because there is, let's say that there's no outer reality for giving it any clues as to what exact state it should be in. And therefore, potentially, it's in all simultaneous states at the same time. So, how does the hydrogen atom solve the conundrum of choosing to be in a particular state and not another? And the way to go about it is it's going to leverage dissociated consciousnesses or dissociated selves that look at or observe that hydrogen atom in one specific angle and believe or have the illusion that they are just one version of that hydrogen atom in a particular state. So let's say that this consciousness here, consciousness 1, is observing the hydrogen atom from this vantage point. And then it creates a virtual hydrogen atom which is called H1. This other consciousness, dissociated consciousness, let's say C2, is observing this hydrogen atom from another vantage point, and it's creating a virtual hydrogen atom H2. And now what's interesting is these two atoms create a common interface for modulating their respective inner states of their respective atoms based on their interaction. And so imagine now that you have all kinds of dissociated consciousnesses that project into virtual instantiations or specific states of that one hydrogen atom, which is in all possible states simultaneously. And then they create a relation between each other, whereby they create an interface, an outer interface, that represents potential alternate states of being that they could be in, based on the relationship with all the others. So let's say that this point in space represents a higher energy point. And let's say that this point in space represents a lower energy point, energy minus, and this is energy plus. Let's say that it's like a cookie. And this is like poison. Okay? So it is just that now there are points in space whereby if this atom gets to this part of space first, then its energy is going to be raised. If this atom gets to that point in space first, then its energy is going to be raised. And so it's basically as if their internal rules that they set for themselves and that they agree upon mutually then create an outer virtual reality of future potential states for every single one of these atoms that is mapped by likelihood, which is space-time. So space-time is just an interface for mapping your potential future alternate states based on probability. Because obviously, things that are perceived to be closer to you, let's say there's a cookie here, an energetic cookie here, and a poison here that is going to lower the energetic value of the hydrogen atom. This energetic cookie, because it's closer in space-time, it just means that alternate state of this hydrogen atom where it has a higher energy is more probable than the state where it is at a lower energy, which is farther away. And this interface emerges, the space-time interfaces, emerges because of the relation of these hydrogen atoms. That is, it wouldn't exist if there wasn't a relation between these atoms. So the outer perceived reality is always virtual. There is no outer, objective outer reality. Outer reality is always constructed between conscious entities that are self-similar, that are different versions of themselves, that interact with themselves based on similar internal rules, and that via their interaction and their relationship give themselves or create a holographic outer reality or virtual reality, which gives them an objective reason to shift their state, their internal state, in a way that is specific or predictable or stable, and the likes. Because if you only have one hydrogen atom in empty space, then you're back to square one. You're back to this state of superposition where that hydrogen atom can be potentially everything. It is the moment where you create a different instantiations of that hydrogen atom that are enter into a relationship that an outer reality can emerge, which just represents a virtual interface representing interactions between those relations. So if this hydrogen atom gets to that part first, then obviously this one doesn't get to that part first, which means this hydrogen atom's energy is heightened and this one stays the same. And so it's like a hydrogen atom is robbing the other of a potential future whereby its state is heightened. Of course, I'm using hydrogen atoms here, but I shouldn't, because hydrogen atoms are not alive and they're not conscious. But apply this principle to life. Now imagine you have life, and imagine that life is just one thing. There's this one cell that is in potentially all possible states simultaneously. And what it's going to do, it's going to create copies of itself, which we call, mitosis in biology. But it's not really reproduction. It's more like you don't know what state you should be in. Therefore, you're going to choose both states simultaneously. You're going to make both choices, which will result in a split of your timeline of what you are as a cell. And then those two copies of yourself are going to interact with each other. And that relationship is going to create an outer perceived reality, which is just a symbolic representation of the kinds of states that you're capable of accessing based on the internal rules that you've set for yourself as life, and that can evolve. So, what does that mean? I'll give you another example, which is very telling. You remember the experience when you were a kid of taking a magnet, and then on the surface of this glass little disc, you place these little specks of metal or some magnetic material. And then you bring the magnet closer to this. And then suddenly these specks of metal sort of react and adopt the shape of the magnetic field of the magnet. And you can see the influence of the magnetic field on the little specks. So now, apply that kind of principle and reasoning to life. Imagine that every single living cell is like a magnet that has a certain influence on virtual outer reality. That is, it uses an external, it's as if, imagine these two parts in that living cell are the same, and you represent them via a kind of symbolic outer perceived reality, which is going to shift those two parts of that cell, which is identical, in a way that is objective, because the cells without that outer interface wouldn't know how to shift their internal state, because there would not be an internal state which would be more likely or more probable than any other. So they create a kind of interface that links each other and that is going to be represented by an object or something in their outer reality, which will give them a reason to shift their respective parts in a way that is objective or consistent. Which means that if this cell manipulates this perceived outer reality in one way, it's going to affect that same part in the other cell, invariably. It's kind of like quantum entanglement, but using an outer interface as a proxy for the entanglement. So, in other words, the outer reality that life perceives is just a projection of all of the sum total of all internal states at a given point in time of all biological life interconnected intricately to one another. You see? Building this kind of reality. So, going to my point about entropy. What is entropy? You as a human, you mess with reality. You create negentropy. Let's say you take, what can you do? You artificially create a sand castle on the beach. And then as time goes by and then wind blows and water comes in, it sort of levels and then returns to a state where the energy of the sand is distributed equally. It's kind of equal distribution of sand on the beach, rather than this unequal distribution where some sands have a higher energetic potential because they're farther away from the center of the earth, and then therefore they have some energetic potential here that is higher, whereas other grains of sands are lower, which creates a kind of a discrepancy here. Why is that phenomenon a thing? Well, in my view, the reason why their entropy exists is by virtue of this intricate network of all biological microbial life, unicellular life, that is all interconnected. And that interface, that layer of reality is so evolved, has refined its inner rules to such a degree that the outer interface that it creates is extremely stable, which means that it dissolves all kinds of deviations from that normalized outer reality back into this equal or stable interface. So because all biological life is highly evolved, and because the rules that life fixed for itself, which is where all of the physical, chemical, biological rules reside, because it has evolved to such a degree that it's really highly evolved, it is creating a kind of a network or a safety net for dissolving any kinds of deviations that are unstable or that do not counteract that negentropic force. And humans are the same. we are also, because we're made up of the same parts, just arranged differently, we're also a giant electromagnet. And every single human, by the way, is a giant electromagnet. And also creates a symbolic interface on top of the existing interface created by all unicellular organisms. So twisting it or shaping the virtual potential states of matter that is within humans and giving it the appearance of an outer reality. So basically, because the inner state of humans is capable of mapping inside of the human ideas, concepts, like for instance, the idea of a chair, the idea of a piano, the idea of an airplane. Because our inner state allows us to map those forms onto our inner reality. That is, the airplane exists within us, the chair exists within us as an idea. Thereby, we have the power to project it in the outer reality and to mold this initial interface to look like, to appear like a chair. But that chair is virtual. It only exists as an object that is the consensual, how should I say this? The consensual information that resides in every single human simultaneously, which means, remember what happens to that dust of metal if now you remove the magnet. It just, it resumes its prior form. Or if another magnet comes along, then the shape it immediately adjusts to the new electromagnetic field that it's exposed to. So in other words, what I'm trying to say is, if every single human disappeared from this reality instantly, not little by little, but instantly, then all of the forms that we've created, like couches, chairs, pianos, computers, cars, that are capable, ideas basically, that are capable of being mapped inside the human mind, all of those forms would dissolve instantly into forms that can be mapped onto quote unquote simpler beings like animals, which, because they do not have a mind that is capable of, how should I say this, of comprehending or harboring the idea of a chair or the idea of a computer, then whatever that molding of the interface was is just going to dissolve into a form that can be mapped onto the consciousnesses or beings that reside in the reality at that point in time. Which means a computer would instantly dissolve into, would rearrange basically into a form that is compatible with what the conscious living entities in that reality at that point in time can actually harbor or understand. So it's almost like, okay, I'm going to give you this example. Imagine if every single human is a 1 terabyte and hard drive coupled with a 2 gigahertz processor, okay? And it's every single one of those is now in a network and is projecting images, let's say JPEG pictures that are high resolution, that are then pooled together to create a virtual reality, which is the sum total of every single JPEG that resides inside the human being. Now all humans disappear, and reality now is maintained, its aspect is maintained by creatures which have only 1 megabyte and 100 megahertz computers. Well, reality would instantly devolve, quote unquote, in its aspect to reflect what the power of the consciousnesses within reality at that time are capable of maintaining as an aspect. It's just like, if you're trying to use a 480p projector to project a 4K image, it doesn't matter that the image is 4K, it's going to be diluted. Its quality is going to be diluted instantly because it's passing through a projector which is incapable of projecting 4K. And so this answers the questions of, all of these questions about, these advanced civilizations that existed before us, the Atlanteans, the Lemurians, the this and that, and they had advanced technologies that allowed to shape stone. Where is all that technology? Why is the only things that we can recover is carvings in stones, pottery, and some giant buildings made up of rock? Well, if you've followed this reasoning that I've just gave you, then it's normal, because if those beings, those advanced beings, disappeared from the planet and there were no humans left onto which the aspect of their technology, that the way they molded virtual representations of matter that is within in their outer reality to look like technology, which again is just a virtual representation or a virtual representation of ways that they can access certain inner states of being, then all of that disappears and vanishes with them instantly almost. And the only thing that remains is, parts of their interface that can be mapped onto the entities that stayed in that reality. And so the only thing that stayed is animals. Well, animals, they can map basic rocks arranged together. They can map pottery. They can maybe map carvings on stone walls, but they can't, map onto their inner state of being a hard drive or a DVD, or something like that, because it's something that is beyond what can be mapped into their inner state of being, and so it vanishes, it disappears instantly. And so that's something that is really very hard to grasp, but that is so, so, so important, is that ultimately there is nothing in your outer reality that doesn't correspond to an inner state of being. And all that we're doing as humans is just evolving the range of possible inner states of being that we can access via the evolution of this outer interface. So an airplane is just a series of sequential shifts in our inner states of being, which we experience as flying to the other side of the planet. But ultimately, if you look at what's examining in strictly what is happening inside the body, all that is happening is that there are a bunch of cells inside this body that every single nanosecond, as you're flying the airplane, are updating their inner state to reflect what's happening on the outside. It's just, there's no other way around it. Like the minute the plane, moves a tiny little bit in what you perceive as your outer reality, it corresponds to a shift in your inner state. It has to be that way, and it cannot be any other way. And so all that we're doing is evolving this interface that is existing between us, between humans, to access more and more sophisticated inner states of being. And you need to evolve that interface to reflect the new possibilities that are unlocked, which could potentially lead to a dead end in terms of our collective experience. So the more humans are on the planet, the more potential inner states it basically multiplies the number of potential inner states that you can experience as a human. So it's this very easy to understand. If you have only three cells in reality, then the potential interactions between those three cells creates a reality that is very simple, an external reality that's very simple. It's not very big in terms of its scope, and because it is limited in terms of the number of potential inner states of being that these three cells can shift to based on their relationship to one another. But the more you add living cells to reality and the more you add humans to reality, the more our interactions with each other unlock more and more subtle and granular and complex inner states of being, which corresponds to a complexification of our outer reality as well. It's just a mirror reflection of the new inner states of being that are unlocked every time a new human appears in this reality. And so what's interesting about this realization? It is that you could view a planet or the agglomeration of matter as basically a hard cap or limit on the potential inner states that you can experience and that need to be mastered before you can how should I say this, that you can become multiplanetary, because if you would manage to escape the planet before you manage to master all the potential inner states from that agglomeration of matter that is just a result of the relationship between all of the consciousnesses that exist on the planet at any given point in time, then if you exit that virtual bundle of inner states of being, which is the planet Earth, then you wouldn't be able to, you'd basically destroy yourself. Because, how should I say this? It's almost like letting you drive on the road before you've managed to learn how to drive. It's the best way to destroy yourself. Because planet Earth basically co-evolves with the conscious beings that are on it, meaning that maybe flat Earth was the aspect of Earth when there were only unicellular organisms around, because the interface, the outer virtual interface they create by virtue of their interactions and their interconnections with each other might be flat and a disk. And the more sophisticated beings appear on the planet, such as insects or animals or whatever, then the planet's aspect reflects the evolution of potential inner states of being of all the conscious entities and the network of all conscious entities present on planet Earth. That is, the aspect of planet Earth and the beings on planet Earth cannot be dissociated. They're intimately linked because the planet is just a virtual representation of all the inner states that we can possibly experience. And you need to gain a mastery over all of those inner states, obviously, before you move on to another planet, because if you do that, if you move on to another planet before you've reached that mastery, then it's just, it's just like a cancer that didn't manage to create a stable, didn't manage to stabilize into a viable organism that just spreads to somewhere else. It's just not perennial. It's not something that, It's not the way of the universe, basically. I just, I don't know how else to put it. Um, but so basically, one very interesting insight from this is that ultimately there is just one human being. There aren't many human beings. There's just one idea of the human being, like, in Plato's ideal forms or whatever. And then dissociated consciousnesses project or look at that human being via a certain angle, which is it looks at the human and, thinks it's me, and then is projected into this guy. And then this consciousness looks at the human and is projected into this guy. And via our interactions with each other, it's almost as if we learn to reverse engineer how to handle all of the potential inner states that are possible for the human to experience without ending up in self-destruction. And it's the same for life and living beings. Like, there's so many potential interactions between unicellular organisms that can result into an evolutionary dead end, where they all, create, they all, for instance, associate and create this one gigantic organism that basically eats the planet and then it dies because it has no sustenance left. Or even the dinosaurs, basically, like just create these giant monsters that have, forever more sharper teeth and more lethal weapons. And then on the other side, you create, these other creatures that have a thicker armor. And you can play this game infinitely, and it just leads to an evolutionary dead end in terms of the range of possible inner states that can be experienced. And so what is the telos of the whole thing? It is that ultimately life as a form will end up, uses these higher forms, like humans, like animals or whatever, to access new inner states that it could not access in its unicellular state. But ultimately, if you think about it, every single experience that the human will have, all of your cells will have as well. But when you dance, for instance, the shift in the inner state of every single one of your cells, that state is ever inaccessible to cells in their unicellular state. It's just not possible for them to shift in a way that would match the inner state of your bodily cells when you're dancing. And so it is just the universe or consciousness that is exploring all of the potential that there is in this one cell, one initial cell. And it does so initially by, copies of that one cell interacting with each other, reaching a limit as to the complexity of inner states of being that they can reach in their state of separation, and having to associate together to reach more sophisticated inner states of being. And here, it's almost mathematical. That is, there inside every single unicellular organism, let's say there's a certain amount of space or mapping space. So that is, the only existing matter truly is always within, and the matter without is just a virtual representation of the state of all internal states of the matter within. But let's say this is 100 megabytes. And let's say that every single one of these cells has to store a copy of the entire reality, virtual reality, that they create for each other because this external reality becomes more and more complex the more you add life to it, then this memory becomes saturated at a certain point. Meaning that outer reality becomes too complex for any single cell in a state of separation to be able to navigate through it and to shift its inner states or explore different inner states through that reality, because it's just the number of potential relations between all of the agents that are present in that reality just becomes too big. And so, what is the solution? Well, if you create a global collective organism or a pluricellular organism, now it's like if you've arranged a number of computers, like 10, for instance, 100 megabyte drives, into a 1 terabyte drive. Because each computer is now deeply interlinked with other computers, not superficially interlinked via an outer interface that has no boundary, but via a fixed boundary where it's almost as if you've simplified your interface by wrapping the interface that you're in here into a coherent whole that makes it possible for you to navigate with your 100 megabyte capacity. So you could say that you as a human, your human envelope is a self-imposed virtual boundary that all of the cells inside your body decide to impose upon themselves in order to simplify their potential inner states and the associated symbolic reality or representation of their alternate inner states in a way that is basically more simple. It's as if the outer reality, because of all the possible interactions between all possible unicellular organisms that are there, is just too chaotic. And so a bunch of unicellular organisms get together and create an enclosed, simplified envelope that is just like a miniature version of the broader interface of all possible interactions of all unicellular organisms. And that enables them to create an entity that can now create a more sophisticated virtual outer reality because it can map more complex inner states inside of itself. So you could say that initially the entire planet was like the insides of your body. And then once these cells create these artificial boundaries or agree to create boundaries because the outer metabolic virtual state of reality or of planet Earth is too complex, then the aspect of Earth evolves because now it is internalized. This aspect is internalized, and now the external aspect of Earth evolves because you've created this artificial boundary. Yeah. So, sorry about this long rant. It was something that is still trying to be birthed, and you can see just how complex all of this is, and it's difficult for me to formulate it in a simple way, and sometimes I don't even understand myself when I'm talking. It's just I feel it as this very important kind of truth or whatever, or intuition, whatever you want to call it, that wants to be birthed, but it's like it's exactly this idea of like an 8K high resolution image that has to go through my brain, and then it's translated into this string of sounds and words that is 360p, and then I'm trying to make sense of it and translate it into human language, and then that's the moment where it gets all fuzzy and mushed up. But something that's really important to understand also is that ultimately, from this insight, humans are enabling each other or allowing each other to access certain inner states via that kind of network. Which means that if you read about the whole stories of spontaneous levitations of monks in the 15th or 16th century Europe, if that human, that monk in the robe, is surrounded by other humans that firmly believe that levitation is possible, that it is a miracle because God, because, faith, because angels, because whatever, then because any inner state that you're in is reflected in the inner states of others that are around you, then it's almost as if we unlock various inner experiences for each other depending on who's watching. And then that translates into an objectively perceived experience or reality where you have people witnessing a monk levitating. You take that same monk, transpose him into the 21st century with a bunch of skeptical materialist scientists, and suddenly he can't levitate anymore. But what's important here to understand is that it's not about unlocking miracles. It's about understanding the consequence or the infinite reverberation of a potential inner state that can be accessed potentially by all other people. And so imagine if you're in 15th century Europe and every single human is persuaded that the apocalypse is near. That is what their inner state. It's almost as if they create within themselves the possibility of that inner state of living the apocalypse, which then in their outer reality takes the form of an experience which matches the inner state that they've defined for themselves. And that can take the form of the Black Plague, for instance, where half the population dies or whatever. And it just shows that there's a need there to evolve the rules that you set for yourselves, the internal rules that you set for yourselves of the inner states that are possible for you to experience, because otherwise it leads to a dead end in terms of the collective experience of humanity, which is why humanity had to evolve towards empiricism and materialism, because if we had kept the rules of miracles and levitations and spontaneous healings and whatnot, it's paired with intimately with the apocalypse, with all kinds of other things like possessions and demons and all kinds of other things, which taken together would have led to a dead end in terms of the human experience. And so at that point, science and empiricism spreads like a virus from mind to mind and modulates the inner rules that humanity fixes for themselves or sets for themselves as a hard boundary as to what is possible to be experienced in order to avoid living the actual experience of the apocalypse, which is just an internal state. It's just an internal state that you allow yourself to experience collectively as humans. And we do this for each other all the time. Like, for instance, if you go to a show where there's somebody that is a humorist or a comic and nobody laughs at their jokes, it's almost as if you're denying that human of having the inner experience of being funny. And that is obvious. It's intuitive. It's like, well, yeah, obviously, if nobody laughs at your jokes, then, the other person is like, oh, it's stripped from the title of being a funny or being a comic. But we don't realize that we're doing that for each other for every single inner state possible. It's just that we're not necessarily doing it consciously. That is, we're not walking in the street and looking at other people and saying, I forbid you from levitating. I forbid you from levitating. But fundamentally, that is what we're doing with the belief systems and the way of viewing reality that we adopt. And all of the events that we're witnessing today are calibrated to force us to evolve the rules that we set for ourselves because they lead to an impasse or to a dead end. Coronavirus. What was the lesson from the coronavirus? It is simply that if you treat humans like machines, then everybody gets the same kind of shot, and we don't care about how should I say this, the how do you call those, reactions or the side effects of these shots. You don't care about all that. Every human is just a car, like a car or a machine, and we all get the same kind of oil change. Climate change. Climate change is also a way of, if you view reality strictly through a materialist lens, then it leads to the climate apocalypse. Quantum computing and AI. If we strictly view everything as being materialist and deterministic, then humans are just a cog in a giant, silicon brain now with chips in our brains, and we're just part of this, singularity. There's just so many events or challenges that we're being faced with that are just the reflection of the consequence of setting boundaries or rules for ourselves which allow for inner states that are bound by materialism for humanity. So it's time to reopen, and that's why, Spiritual Brainstorm, plenty of other channels are talking about the Grand Awakening and all that stuff. It is just because the inner states that are possible to unlock or experience via materialism are reaching their maximum, and we need to open that canvas. But what I suspect is, just like living, these singular-celled organisms reach a maximum in terms of what they can handle in their state of separation, in terms of complexity of the outer perceived reality, and then need to wrap themselves around a simplified interface and create a coherent whole and overcome separation. I believe that as humans now collectively, we're also reaching a state whereby the outer virtual reality, which represents alternate inner states that can be experienced by every single human, is becoming too complex for any human to map and handle as well. Which is why we're talking about this whole 5D ascension of the planet, becoming self-aware and all those things, because we need to wrap the interface we've created around itself, let's say, and create this coherent global collective organism in which every single human is but one cell, because otherwise we will not be able to handle the growing complexity of the interface we're in because of the addition of new humans to the reality, which multiplies the potential inner states of being that we can experience just because of the possible interactions with each other of, let's say, ideas with each other. Let's even put it that way. So I hope you found this video interesting. Don't hesitate to leave a comment. Sorry about vomiting inside your brain. Hopefully next time I discuss these things, it'll be more digested, let's say, and structured. But at least you have this initial, this initial take on all of this information that is trying to course through me. So don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and talk to you in the next video. Bye, guys.